There are definitely some receivers in this class who are frustrating to watch because they just don't realize they have long arms to be able to help keep themselves clean. Williams, though, knows that he has long arms and uses them well to win with his counters. He's also good at using his arms to make the initial move and also does a good job anticipating the defender to make the miss with his quick feet. He also has some really nice timing and quickness with his feet to make him an underrated player with his release. Hey y'all! This video will be continuing going through the 2025 wide receiver prospects, and I'll be covering Pat Bryant from Illinois, Roc White III from UNLV, Roc Taylor from Memphis, Dan Brown Jr. from Miami, and Savion Williams from TCU. If you're new to these, my wide receiver evals use some different grading methods, which if you want more details on these, you can check out part 1 of my series, which should be accessible with the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details on how I do my grading in that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of the receivers from last year for reference, you can check them out with the link that should be in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals and full scan reports out for players like Emeka Ibuka, Elikayo Manor, Isaiah Bond, Jack Besh, Dylan Royals, Jaden Higgins, Dylan Noel, Isaiah Bond, L. Williams, Luther Burns III, Matthew Golden, Nick Nash, and more, which you can check out on my channel. I'll be continuing to go through my top 50 wide receivers in the draft, so to be sure you don't miss any of the other parts of the wide receiver series or any other positional group series in the future, be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at Bryant. Starting with a look at Bryant's basic stats, after being a moderate contributor in years past, Bryant broke out setting career highs for targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns with 78 targets, 54 receptions, 984 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Also, after previously struggling with drops, Bryant turned his hands into a strength, which is a single drop for a drop rate of 1.8% in 2024. Also, though he's branded as a pure X receiver, and honestly probably will play as that in the NFL, he did play about a fifth of his snaps from the slot. Looking at his highlight games against Oregon, Michigan, and Penn State, we unfortunately do see a bit of a concerning trend for Bryant. In those 3 games, Bryant averaged about 3 catches, about 32 yards, and failed to catch a touchdown in any of them. Those games are all pretty low compared to his solid season-long totals, and then we look at some of his other games against like Rutgers, Michigan State, Purdue, and Central Michigan, when he had over 100 yards and a touchdown, and it does kind of just start to make me nervous that Bryant might just be one of those players who's able to produce against solid to lower quality opponents, but fail to be able to deliver consistently against top talent. So to be sure if that truly is the case, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, his improved hand made him so deadly, especially thanks to catching the ball with late hands and always extending his arms out to make the catch, which gave the defender very little chance to make a play on it. Those reliable hands and good habits led to him converting uncontested catches at an impressive 69.2% for 2024 and 54.8% for his career. He also does a good job working back to the quarterback and high-pointing the ball to make himself an easier target. Also, those reliable hands let him be so much more of a weapon in jump ball situations and in the red zone, which showed with him setting a career high in touchdowns in 2024. This season, he showed incredible concentration and ball tracking at times to be able to finish some really difficult catches with some sensational last-second adjustments. He can go high and low to make a play on the ball, and has good awareness to keep a foot in bounds around the sidelines. He also has great timing with his attacks to maximize his long frame, and can make catches at the very end of his frame with his huge catch radius. Now, while his hands did take a massive step forward, we have just 1 year of great success from the perspective of drops. Maybe he has turned a new leaf and the drops are behind him. However, there have been a lot of players who have put together one good season of avoiding drops, but returned to their bad habits. As a Packers fan, we saw that firsthand with Dontavian Wicks after a good rookie season. So the risk is there and he needs to prove that he won't regress. So Bryant got off to a hot start with an A- for his hands, A- for jump ball and contested catch, and an A for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, he does a good job establishing leverage early in his routes with his footwork and by using his frame. Also, he knows how to use the long arms in his release and does a good job using hand counters to help survive press. That being said, the keyword for him against press is survive. While it doesn't shut him down, he often just relied on his size to be able to win instead of using technique or his footwork. Part of the issue is that I'm not confident he has the foot speed to be able to cleanly avoid press, which will cause issues for him in the NFL. The issue also led to him having trouble separating against physical coverage, which will only get worse in the NFL. In fact, I kind of think that's a big factor of why he underperformed against quality opponents. While there was obviously a lot of things that do factor into production, it is just disappointing and concerning to see him consistently fail to make significant impacts in tougher matchups. What also contributed to his separation issues was his route running. He often telegraphed his routes which better corners and quality teams were able to sniff out. I'd also like to see him sell his vertical more. He often went back a bit slow, which didn't get the defense too panicked, especially with his lack of speed that let them feel comfortable crashing down his in-breaking routes. He also doesn't get enough knee bend in his breaks to be able to make clean cuts, leading to very rounded cuts. When he did try to make more concise cuts, they often lack great burst and struggle to generate separation. Also, he often needed an extra couple of steps to be able to gather himself in his breaks, which gave more opportunities for the defender to be able to shut down the route. I'd also like to see him have a better eye for zone coverage, as he can often let himself drift out of openings and into coverage. So things cooled off for Bryant with a C- for his route running and a C for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role and athleticism RAS, after the catch he has a good transition to turn upfield and has good peripheral vision and anticipation to be ready for incoming tackle attempts. He's also able to sometimes survive those tackle attempts thanks to running with good pad level and having good balance. He also showed some solid vision to find the best route to take after the catch. However, he is just adequate after the catch and doesn't offer much upside, unfortunately. He has poor top speed and very limited wiggle in open space. So unless he's plowing through a defender, he likely isn't going to be picking up more than the minimum. He also unfortunately isn't as good of a blocker as you'd like for someone his size. He has a lot of struggles getting square with his target and doesn't get much leverage due to his size and lack of knee bend. As far as how he fits in the NFL, as I mentioned earlier, he'll likely slide in as an X receiver for a team. With that being the case, it's important for him to be able to improve his blocking, as he can be asked to do this regularly if he is able to get some playing time. Regardless of that, with his separation issues, I think the most clear path to playing time for him will be to be used as a jump ball receiver, as he has a big catch radius and the ball skills to be a QB-friendly target. The problem is that those types of players aren't being targeted as much, and quicker, faster players who can play in space are being more favored with the recent trend in NFL offenses. So while there is still a role he can go for, there might not be as many teams pursuing a role like a jump ball guy anymore. So Bryant aimed for consistency and got a C in yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism and RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he played with much better hands this year to make him nearly automatic if the ball got to his hands, even in contested catch situations. There weren't too many times the ball didn't make it to his hands thanks to his massive catch radius and good adjustment skills. With those traits, he's a great red zone weapon and could quickly help an NFL team in the red zone. Finally, while he doesn't have the speed or acceleration to escape defenders, he does run with good pad level to be able to shed some tackles sometimes. But as I mentioned, he has a little wiggle to be able to shake defenders after the catch. That lack of wiggle also shows with his trouble clearing press, so between his lack of foot speed and trouble clearing press, he often has trouble getting consistent separation. What makes it even harder for him to get separation is the way that he telegraphs his routes and have poor cuts, which sometimes force him to need to go to jump ball attempts due to being blanketed by defenders. So by taking the average of all his grades, Bryant earned a 2.62 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. Bryant is a player who will get a lot of fans from his highlights, however there's a lot more success in the NFL than highlights. Players need to be able to win with their route running and separation to have consistent success. Unfortunately, I'm not confident Bryant can do that just yet. Now he is a fantastic ball winner and potentially the best in the class, so that can't be ignored and it could earn him a role with the team very quickly. However, that is a very niche role in today's NFL that now has an emphasis on winning by getting players into space. As for a comp, I have Quintus Cephas as Bryant's comp. Both have excellent ball skills that rival the best in their respective class. Also, both have very reliable hands and some nice contact balance to potentially shed a tackle after the catch. Unfortunately, neither have great speed or quickness, which does still limit them though. Also, both can get leverage, but often struggle to get consistent separation in part due to their lack of great athleticism and burst. Cephas was a solid contributor to the NFL before being stupid and betting on NFL games, which swiftly allowed him to be let go from the team and now has failed to get meaningful playing time in the NFL. However, if he did have a brain, he probably likely would have continued to be a solid contributor thanks to his ball skills. I think Bryant could contribute in a similar way, but it is important that he goes to a team that still values players winning this way, and a quarterback who can place the ball in a place for him to be able to shine. Also, he should probably avoid gambling on games, which Cephas apparently didn't know. Going to our next receiver, Ricky White III from UNLV. White entered the season as a number of people's sleeper for the position. For the most part, he didn't disappoint from a production standpoint, getting 124 targets for 79 receptions, 1,041 yards, and 11 touchdowns. He did have a fair number of drops with 7 on the season, which did bring his drop rate up to a higher 8.2%. Also, White continued to get opportunities both inside and outside, with about 2/3 of his snaps coming from the outside and a third coming from the slot for 2024. Looking at his highlight games, including the Mountain West Championship game against Boise State and his games against Oregon State and Syracuse, he put up great production in competitive games against Oregon State and Syracuse, getting at least 9 receptions, 88 yards, and a touchdown. His game against Boise State wasn't as impressive though, with just 4 receptions for 21 yards. Plus, this was on 12 targets, which typically should lead to better successful outings. Now, quarterback play for UNLV was an absolute mess against Boise State, but still, not an ideal way for him to finish his regular season. When looking at the rest of his games, he was consistently involved with at least 5 receptions and or 50 yards in 10 of his 13 games, but while that production is encouraging, it was against pretty low-level teams. He unfortunately just didn't have much of an opportunity to be able to prove how talented he is against better matchups, with so few matchups against quality defenses even these past couple of years. So to try to see how talented he is with his grades, let's take a look at his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he isn't afraid to absorb a hit to be able to go for a catch. Also, he can make some really tough adjustments to throws and showed some good awareness around the sidelines even. He also showed the ability to consistently finish catches over his shoulders as well. That being said, his hand technique is still pretty inconsistent and sometimes can lean towards using unnecessary body catches. With his tendency to be too reliant on body catches, he had some missed opportunities in contested catch situations, leading to a success rate of just 39.1% for 2024. So White had a bit of a rough start with a C+ for his hands, but showed good grades with his B for a jump ball contested catch, as well as a B+ for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, he has good twitch and foot speed to be able to win his release and quickly establish leverage. He also has good stem fakes to be able to get leverage in intermediate and deep concepts. He also runs his routes with pretty good tempo and can adjust his speed to his route to be able to attack openings in the defense. He also has a great eye for openings against zone coverage and is so good at making subtle pivots to be able to work his way into those holes. However, he may be less successful against man coverage, in part due to running a limited route tree. Also, he doesn't have that much explosion in his cuts and tends to round a lot of his cuts, which also makes things worse. His thinner frame also creates issues as he'll often let defenders push him off his routes too frequently. That, along with his limited athleticism, also led to him struggling to separate downfield. His release may also present issues with his ability to separate downfield as well. He was able to benefit from a lot of free releases at UNLV, but he did struggle at times that defenders did play him close. He often struggled to match their physicality, and his arm counters were pretty ineffective to help clear contact. So White kinda just has another meh showing, with a C+ for his route running and a C- for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism or RAS, he's a very twitchy athlete in space who makes defenders miss despite what his combine performance might suggest. He also has very quick transition upfield after the catch and great peripheral vision to be able to know where to turn to be able to avoid a defender. His center vision is also very good as he does a good job following his blocks. He even showed a good balance of being able to be more creative with the ball in his hands while still knowing how to follow his blocks. He'll show some solid balance despite his small frame. Also, he shows pretty good effort as a blocker with good hand placement. Now, while the effort is there as a blocker, he is often too upright in his blocks, which sacrifices leverage and drive. Also, his base can be a little bit too narrow, which affects his anchor as well. As for how he fits in the NFL, he has good versatility with experience inside and outside. His experience on special teams also will add versatility and may actually be a big factor in him earning a roster spot. For those that aren't aware, he blocked a whopping 4 punts in 2024. To put in perspective how ridiculous that is, the 3 teams tied for second in the whole FBS only had 3 total block punts. So White not only led UNLV to lead the nation in block punts, but he literally had more blocks than any other collective team in all of the FBS. So that special teams value will likely resonate with the team, but as a receiver, he can still be used in a few different ways to maybe get some playing time on offense as well. But it will likely be dependent on if he can overcome his athletic limitations and if his hands will be reliable enough. Also, there is a very real chance that he isn't drafted at all regardless of how high teams value him, due to the off-field concerns that led to him transferring out of Michigan State. From what I saw, it's a lot of messy details, so it will be interesting to see how NFL teams view it after investigating it, but it will be interesting to monitor how that makes any impact on his draft results. So White had a very wide spectrum of results here, with a B for his yards after catch potential, C+ for his future role, and an F+ for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he has a very good eye to win against zone coverage and help compensate for his lack of great athleticism. Despite the lack of great athleticism, he's a very twitchy athlete after the catch to help make defenders miss in space. Also, he can make some really nice adjustments to throws, which gives him a bigger catch radius and some more upside. Also, he does a lot of the intangible things, like giving good effort as a blocker, and playing in a lot of different roles, including being a special teams ace. Now, while he was used in a lot of different ways, he does need to take some time to focus on his fundamentals, starting with his hand technique and arm extension and catch attempts. Those issues led to drops and variable success in contested catch situations. Also, he will need to find a way to be able to survive contact with his small frame, since this will only become a bigger issue in the NFL. Finally, while it isn't something he can improve on, his off-the-field history will need to be looked into by teams, and evaluated by teams to be able to determine if they feel he's worth a potential PR risk. So by taking the average of all his grades, White earned a 2.29 out of 4, which puts him in my needs improvement to contribute tier. White is a player expecting to be higher on, but his poor combine performance really sunk his overall grade. That being said, even if he had a great combine, I still have concerns about his hands, release, and how he holds up against physical coverage. He was able to have this be less impactful in college thanks to getting some free releases and playing against lesser competition in the Mountain West Conference. However, things won't be that easy in the NFL, and he'll have to prove he's able to step up. As for a comp, I have Tony Lippett as White's comp. Both have a very good eye for openings against zone coverage and can make some tough adjustments to throws. Also, both are twitchy athletes in their release, however neither are great against press and struggle against physical coverage. Also, both can miss opportunities in contested catch situations and have limited ability to make plays downfield due to the lack of great athleticism. Lippett ended up converting to cornerback, which was likely the best move for him based on what I saw on him as a receiver, Now, I'm not using that comp because I expect White to convert to cornerback, but I do just wonder how he'll handle the transition to the NFL with bigger, more physical athletes. Going to our next receiver, Roc Taylor from Memphis. After a breakout year in 2023, getting 69 receptions for 1,083 yards and 4 touchdowns on 102 targets, Taylor saw some slight regression despite getting slightly more targets with 107 targets in the season that turned into 66 receptions for 950 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, he did also see a slight reduction in his drops, with just 4 drops for a drop rate of 5.6% for 2024. Also for this season, he again played nearly every snap from the outside. Looking at his highlight games, Memphis didn't have a very tough schedule, so I ended up going with their West Virginia, Tulane, and Florida State games. Now, he got off to a very rocky start at the start of the season with an early, highly anticipated matchup against Florida State. Unfortunately, he did fail the test outside getting 4 3-yard reception. That did make me a little bit nervous that Taylor was going to be in trouble this year. However, he did a good job bouncing back and capped off the season, getting 7 receptions for 96 yards against Tulane and 5 receptions for 116 yards against West Virginia. Across his whole season, he had at least 5 receptions in 8 of his 13 games, and at least 50 yards in 10 of his 13 games. Kind of like Kyle Williams, though, he didn't have very many games with over 100 yards, which is 3 for the 2024 season, compared to having 6 in 2023. Also add on, as I mentioned before, he had less touchdowns in 2024 as well. So to see if we saw a true regression, and to see how talented he is, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he has great size and has great hands to make himself a reliable target. With a great size, he's able to wall off defenders away from the ball and does a good job trapping the ball to protect it in contested catch situations, which helped him convert 60% of his contested catch situations in 2024. He also consistently caught the ball with good hand technique and away from his frame to help him in both those contested catch situations and the uncontested catch situations as well. Also, he can make some great body adjustments to have a huge catch radius. He can also rise through contact to be able to find a way to get the play on a ball even if a defender's on him. Down the field, he also shows off great ball tracking skills. He's easily able to field catches over his shoulders and make tight catches around the sidelines. However, his ball tracks can be sometimes a little bit awkwardly timed at some moments, and he'll sometimes not use full arm extension, which could help him finish some tight catches a bit more frequently. So with a really nice start, Taylor got a B+ for his hands and jump ball and contested catch, and an A- for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, while his release does need work, he does showcase some nice quick foot speed at times to give him potential to improve in this area. That being said, his route running release do really scare me, especially in games since he just seemed to really struggle against physical, more gifted cornerbacks like he did in Florida State. Against Florida State, he was unable to separate for nearly the entire game, which is a major red flag as the athletes will only get better in the NFL. Another part of the issue of him struggling to separate was his lack of nuance in his routes, as he often just ran routes at one speed. If he just threw in a few fakes, I think it would help him get some easier wins and let him beat better athletes downfield. As he is now, he can sometimes just struggle to stack good athletes and can struggle to establish leverage downfield, which limits his big play potential. His cuts can also be a little bit too slow developing and not crisp enough to be able to justify the extra time he does need to take to be able to make his cuts. He also can be a little bit iffy finding openings in zone coverage, which is also a little bit concerning. Also, at times, he can look like he's thinking too much when working over the middle to find openings between defenders, and can also struggle to navigate around defenders blocking his route path. His trouble with contact also showed in his release. There's just too many times when he just tried to overpower his defender through press, which that can work against lower level competition like he faced for a lot of the years, but not against better talents like we saw against Florida State. Despite having quick feet and sometimes using arm counters, his feet just often aren't quick enough to be able to keep himself clean, and his arm counters aren't strong enough to be able to get him past press. Also, he has a pretty limited release package, which also makes things a bit predictable for corners. This is clearly watching him go up against better corners who did a good job guessing his move and jamming him up. And then what also led to him getting jammed up was his delay in reacting to corners press, so there's still a lot that does make me concerned about his release. So things went in the wrong direction for Taylor with just a C- for his route running and a D+ for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, he has great blocking technique with good use of good leverage, hand placement, and active feet to give consistent quality blocks. Also, his quick feet combined with his good vision and fluid transition after the catch let him pick up good yards after the catch if he's given an opening. However, though he does have good straight line speed, he does seem to lack wiggle and contact balance to be able to survive hits when defenders get their hands on him. As for how he fits in the NFL, he is a bit tricky to see how he can best help a team. He certainly shows some good vertical ability in college, but his lack of great speed and struggles stacking defenders will likely limit his impact in the NFL. Also, his route running isn't polished or quick enough to consistently help underneath. He was a solid ball winner, but he often did this against smaller, weaker defenders, so it's just hard to know if he can truly be successful at that in the NFL. So it's just kind of a hard way to be able to be certain that Roc Taylor will be able to be a consistent contributor for an NFL team, especially once he goes up a level of competition. So Taylor's grades started to see a gradual increase in his grades, with a C for his yards after catch potential, C+ for his future role, and B- for his athleticism and RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he has great hands to make him a reliable target for quarterbacks. Also, he has a big catch radius and knows how to use his big frame to box out defenders and make situations easier for himself. He also shows some good vertical ability that will hopefully translate to the NFL against better competition. Finally, he is a really good blocker, which could help him get some playing time early on in his career. Now, though I do want to be higher on him, his route running issues do really concern me. He can struggle to get separation in part due to his cuts being too slow developing and lacking explosiveness to be able to break past his defender. Also, his poor performance against press and physical coverage also cause issues for him, as he's often unable to clear contact, which leads to defenders staying close to him. Also, he seems unable to clear tackle attempts in space, which limits his ability after the catch as well. Finally, a lot of his issues could be okay if they occur against quality opponents, but them also popping up against lower level competition does make me nervous with trusting him that he can progress to be a contributor in the NFL. Also, his struggles against Florida State made me especially concerned with trusting him, since I feel like they just really highlight a lot of his red flags. So by taking the average of all its grades, White earned a 2.54 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. While I can usually get behind smaller school of prospects playing against lower level competition, Taylor does concern me with his struggles in 2024. Now, he was very good against quality opponents in 2023, which does make me a bit more optimistic that he could be a riser. However, his struggles against press and physical coverage still concern me as a likely rate-limiting step for him to be a successful NFL receiver. As for a comp, I have Gary Jennings Jr. as his comp. Both have great hands and know how to use their frame to win in contested catch situations. Also, both have good straight line speed to give them some vertical ability as well. Despite having that straight line speed though, neither have much wiggle to escape tackles in space, and also both can struggle with difficulties getting separation against better athletes, which can present a major problem in the NFL. Jennings has been unable to make an impact in the NFL and continues to struggle in other football leagues. So I have a lot of concerns that Taylor could have a lot of the same struggles once he goes up in a level of competition. The big thing for Taylor is that he needs to be able to hold up against physical coverage and press better to be able to play like a player with the great frame that he has. Moving to our next receiver, Sam Brown Jr. from Miami. After seeing Dane Brugler talk up Brown a bit before the 2024 season, I went and watched him as part of my summer scouting and got excited about what he could do with quarterback Cam Ward at Miami. Unfortunately, he kind of just disappointed as he only earned 57 targets, which turned into 36 receptions, 509 yards, and 2 touchdowns. On top of that, his hands took a huge step back, having 4 drops for a drop rate with 10% for the year. Also, he again continued to play the majority of snaps from the outside, with slightly over 90% of his snaps coming from the outside in 2024. For his highlight games, I chose his games against Georgia Tech, Duke, and Louisville. He was kind of all over the place with these games, with a good game against Louisville, getting 3 receptions for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns, but then had okay games at best with just 2 receptions for 46 yards against Duke and 3 receptions for 27 yards against Georgia Tech. We continue to see his inconsistencies when looking at his weekly breakdowns, as he had 5 or more receptions in just one of his 11 games, and met that criteria for one game against a lesser Ball State team, and just barely met it with just 5 receptions. Also, he managed to get 40 yards or more in just 5 of his 11 games, despite being an offense with the potential top quarterback of the draft. To see if his grades indicate that he's worth monitoring at all for the draft, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, at times he can make some really nice adjustments to off-target throws thanks to his big frame. I was hoping his hands could take a step forward, but they ended up taking a huge step back as I mentioned before, with a lot of the same frustrating concentration drops and double catches. He often looks awkward making catches away from his frame, which showed with his success rate in contested catch situations decreasing all the way down to 18.2%. His ball tracking is just really rough in a lot of areas, as he'll often have the ball sneak up on him as well. So it's one of the roughest starts for any of the receivers I've gone through so far. He earned just a C- for his hands, and C's for his jump ball and contested catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, at Miami he was able to run a more diverse route tree and continue to show good eye against zone coverage. He also did a good job working back to the quarterback, especially when the quarterback was scrambling and using his big frame to be able to protect the ball. He's also able to consistently use his long arms to help push off coverage as well. That being said, his route running is very rough, which led to him having trouble getting much, if any, separation in his routes. His cuts are also typically slow developing and often rounded. He also often needs extra steps to be able to gather himself in his cuts as well. That doesn't help either. He also doesn't run with much, if any, nuance in his routes, which makes his routes too easy to read. Those issues led to him struggling to establish leverage in a lot of his routes. He also struggles stacking defenders, which limits his ability to show off his athleticism and a consistent impact downfield. What also led to his limited ability to help downfield was his difficulty beating physical coverage. Despite his frame and strength, he often let physical corners push him around and heavily slow down his route. Improved release technique could go a long way for him, as it just isn't there just yet. His foot speed is also disappointing, and he often just settles for a simple jab step and then tries to clear the press with his arm counter and power. Unfortunately, though he does use arm counters, they just often aren't effective enough and as effective as they should be at his size and his length. So unfortunately, Brown had things just get worse with a D for his route running and a D plus for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role and athleticism or RAS, he does a good job using his long arms as a blocker. He honestly might be one of the best blockers in his class, as he does a good job getting square, establishing leverage, and using proper hand placements. Then he'll use his active feet and his frame and strength to be able to get good drive on his blocks. He also had one of the best RAS scores in his class thanks to his combination of speed, size, and explosiveness. When he makes a catch, he has quick acceleration to blow past defenders. He also has a good eye to be able to find the best route to be able to take thanks to his blocks. Finally, he does run with good balance and pad level to survive weak arm tackles to pick up extra yards. That being said, though he did show some potential after the catch, his transition after the catch can sometimes be a little bit clunky. Also, he can be a little bit hesitant with his moves in open space, which opens up to being taken down and missing an opportunity to pick up extra yards. As for how he fits in the NFL, I think he is a bit of a tough sell. He isn't a great route runner, he has inconsistent hands, and he isn't able to be a reliable vertical threat despite his size and speed. So it just becomes hard to be able to imagine what he could offer over an alternative option already on the roster. So we were at least able to finally get some positive grades for Brown, with a B plus for his yards after catch potential, an OK C plus for his future role, and a great A due to his incredible RAS score. As a summary of his strengths, he has a big frame with moments when he can put it all together, and has some good catches at the end of his frame to make use of his big catch radius. Also, he has a good eye for openings and zone coverage, as well as after the catch when he can use his athleticism and balance to pick up extra yards. Finally, he is a very good blocker, which could help him get an opportunity to be able to get on the field. However, he will have trouble getting on the field if he continues to struggle making routine catches. His hands need to rebound, and he needs to improve his ball tracking skills as well. He also needs to improve his route running and release, since both lack a lot of polish and are largely unsuccessful. His struggles in those led to him having trouble stacking his defender, and not have as much impact as a vertical threat between his RAS score and being able to go to Miami. So by taking the average of all his grades, Brown earned a 2.21 out of 4, which puts him in my unlikely to contribute tier. Brown is a really frustrating player because he could be a really solid player with a combination of size and speed and athleticism. Unfortunately, he just really struggles in some key areas that make it hard to trust him in the NFL. Maybe a team believes they can provide the development he needs, however it's just hard to envision that since he's had a lot of these issues for all 5 years he's been in school, with some of the issues even getting worse this past season. As for a comp, I have Seth Williams as his comp. Both have very good speed and athleticism to give him a lot of potential. Also, both are good at using their arms in their routes and show some good moments where they're able to make some good plays away from the frame. However, those moments don't happen frequently enough, and there's just too many disappointing lapses in their hands in between. Also, both struggle to generate separation and will let physical defenders dictate the snap despite their bigger frames. Williams has had basically no impact in the NFL at this point, and is already at the point where he's bouncing around the league despite being in his mid-20s. Brown unfortunately will likely have a similar fate, unless he is able to take a step forward as a receiver. Moving to our final receiver this part, and likely the most interesting, Savion Williams from TCU. In 2024, Williams had 83 targets for 60 receptions for 611 yards and 6 touchdowns, which is pretty unremarkable despite those being career highs for him. Also, he also was used as a rusher with 38 snaps from the backfield at the running back position, had 46 Wildcat snaps, and had some end arounds thrown in as well. With those opportunities, he was given 51 carries and was able to get 322 yards for a yards per carry up to 6.3 yards, as well as 6 touchdowns. So now we're talking about a player who nearly hit 1,000 total yards and is a lot more interesting now. What does kind of hurt that momentum though is his drops. He had 8 drops in 2024 for a drop rate of 11.8%. His drop rate has been all over the place, with 11.8% in 2024 like I mentioned, a much better drop rate of 4.7 in 2023, but then a really terrible drop rate of 14.7 in 2022. As I mentioned with his backfield experience, he only got a lot of snaps all over the formation, but to focus more where he got those opportunities as a receiver, he played about 70% of his snaps from the outside and just under a quarter of his snaps from the slot. Look at his highlight games against Oklahoma State, Utah, and SMU. He had decent production with a good game against an albeit weaker Oklahoma State defense with 7 receptions, 52 yards, and a touchdown. His SMU game was solid with 3 receptions for 50 yards, but it's worth noting that TCU was getting blown out that game. His Utah game was a lot more competitive, but he was less effective with 5 receptions for 27 yards. Also for context, he ran for 19 yards and a touchdown on 5 carries against Oklahoma State, and 72 yards and 7 carries against Utah. When looking at the rest of his schedule and how he performed as a receiver specifically, he had 5 or more receptions in just 5 of his 12 games, with one of the games being against Long Island University. His production from a receiving yards standpoint also was a bit disappointing, with him only reaching 50 yards in 6 of his 12 games. So with some fluctuating production, let's take a look at some of his grades to see how we can get a good gauge on him. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, He has a great eye for 50-50 balls and does a good job high pointing the ball and rising above defenders thanks to his size. There's also some great flashes of some really impressive fluid adjustments he made to throws by rising up or going down low. Also, while he does need to clean up some stuff with his hands, I do think it's worth knowing that 3 of his 8 drops came in the season opener against Stanford. So if we ended up removing that game, his drop rate would have been 9.3%, which still isn't great, but is a little bit more palatable. Also, he consistently caught the ball away from his body, which was good to see for a receiver with such long arms. Those arm extensions also helped him be very successful in contested catch situations as well, with a success rate of 88.9% in 2024 and 75% throughout his entire career. So while his hand technique could use some work, his hands are very strong to finish catches. But like I said, he will need to improve his hands and technique to be able to be a more consistent contributor in the NFL. He has a lot of lapses with the hand technique and doesn't always follow the ball to his hands if defenders are close. That led to a number of drops and a lot of double catches which were all over his film. I think part of the issue was a ball tracking issue, as he seemed a little bit too slow getting his hands up even when he had ample time to make a play on the ball. Also, it showed sometimes with his attacks as he could sometimes mistime his attacks on balls as well. So Williams earned just a C+ for his hands, but earned a good pair of B+ for his jump ball and contested catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running release, I was really surprised with his release ability. There are definitely some receivers in this class who are frustrating to watch because they just don't realize they have long arms to be able to help keep themselves clean. Williams though knows that he has long arms and uses them well to win with his counters. He's also good at using his arms to make the initial move and also does a good job anticipating the defender to make the miss with his quick feet. He also has some really nice timing and quickness with his feet to make him an underrated player with his release. He will need some work in his route running and technique, but he does a good job selling his vertical to then cut back to the quarterback for an easy completion. But unfortunately, he does still need a lot of work as a route runner, as it does scare me. He ran a very limited route tree and looked a bit awkward at times running his routes since he was sometimes thinking too much. That thinking also caused him to be a bit slower in his approach, which often led him to not being an available option for the quarterback. In his routes, I was disappointed with the lack of deception he had as a player with the amount of experience that he has, and he didn't run with any good tempos, head fakes, or anything else to really help get him open. His cuts also didn't help get him open as they were often very rounded and invited defenders to help get back into play. Also, he seemed to have trouble finding openings against zone coverage and would often lead himself into trouble. Physical coverage also often gave him trouble as he often let routes affect him too much despite his size. That wouldn't be too much of an issue, but he also had trouble avoiding contact on his routes, which often led him to be taken out of plays. What was also really frustrating to watch at times is the times that he would be able to get past his man with his release, but then immediately give up the leverage he had and just cover himself again. For his release, while it was a pleasant surprise, it doesn't seem overly diverse, so I do have concerns about how reproducible that will be in the NFL with more snaps when he isn't hidden from press. I even saw some issues with reps later on in games when he would sometimes resort to running around defenders too much and altering his path would affect the timing of his route too much. So Williams ended up earning a very poor D for his route running, but then ended up earning a good B for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, he has a great mix of athleticism and size at 6'4", or 222 pounds. He can pick up yards with his good vision, whether it's from the wildcat or as a standard pass catcher. Also, his ability to play from the backfield or standard receiver spots shows a lot of versatility. He also does a great job following his blocks, even shows some ability to hug his blocks to get the most out of their efforts. Once he makes the catch, he has a very quick transition upfield and good acceleration to pick up yards very quickly. If he isn't able to outrace his defender, he does have good contact balance and pad level to help him stay on his feet. Also, while he isn't the most successful blocker, he does block with a good base and has some good knee bend to be able to get more leverage at his size. However, he is still pretty rough as a blocker with poor hand technique and anchor, which lets defenders get past him too frequently. As for how he fits in the NFL, this is where things get dicey for me. While he does have really good ball skills and size to be a potential red zone, jump ball weapon, his inconsistent hands could lose him those opportunities in the NFL. Also, he's just a very raw route runner, which makes it questionable how he can help in other situations. Regarding his rushing ability, I've seen some people float around the idea of him transitioning to running back, or at the very least being used in a mixed capacity, but I just have a hard time seeing this work out in the long term with his 6'4" size. So while he does have some really exciting traits, I think there's some very clear barriers that he'll need to be able to overcome, otherwise he'll have trouble getting sustained playing time. So Williams earned a great B+ for his yards after catch potential, C+ for his future role, and an estimated A- for his athleticism or RAS. For a summary of his strengths, he has a very wide catch radius and ball skills to make some really impressive catches in 50-50 situations. With the ball in his hands, he runs with great athleticism and contact balance to be a headache for defenders to try to bring down. Also, I was really impressed with his release as he is able to give himself a chance to make a fair impact as a receiver in the NFL. One of the reasons he was able to win with his release was thanks to his quick feet, which he could also use in other areas to help improve his deficits with the right coaching staff. One of those deficits that he does need to improve though is his route running. He runs his routes with poor technique and lack of nuance, and really needs to work on his cuts. It was disappointing to see him be such a poor route runner, especially considering that he ran a limited route tree and should have had more polished if he had less routes to worry about. I was also disappointed to see the ways that he could concede leverage despite winning with his release and would also let physical corners push him off his route path despite being bigger and stronger than them. Finally, his hands were also disappointing to see as he took a step back again. He needs to work to get back to his 2023 hand technique and keep those habits past a single season. So by taking the average of all his grades, Williams earned a 2.79 out of 4, which puts him in my good role player tier. Williams has a lot of holes in his route running and hands. The problem is that these are things that receivers are supposed to be good at. So those major holes in what are supposed to be the foundation of the position could make him a troubling sell to teams. However, he has some really good ball skills, athleticism, and release potential to make him an easier sell. I'm not certain if a team could turn Williams into a top receiver for their team. However, I also don't think it's impossible given the potential he has. For whatever that's worth, that already makes him a lot more interesting than a lot of other players with similar grades as him, since they are just more looking like clear contributors. As for a comp, I have Terrell Pryor Sr. as his comp. Both are raw players but have a lot of impressive traits that may interest the team. Also, both have good ball skills and athleticism to give them a leg up against more limited players. However, both struggle with hand technique and are very behind as pass catchers. Also, both show very poor fundamentals as route runners that need to be improved in the NFL. It took Pryor a few years, but he managed to have a 1,000-yard season in his final season in Cleveland. Similar to Pryor, I think Williams could eventually be a big-time contributor if he is given a chance to develop and goes to a favorable situation to get playing time down the road. And that's all for part 8. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the receivers in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. This is just part 8 of 10, so there's still a few more evals that will come out over the next few days. So to be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the video as it would help the channel, the series grow thanks to you. If you want just to run for the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack as I'll have the full rated eval out for each player at the same time as the video. But thank you all and see you all next time.